Washington, D.C.
Tonight, a big tech doubleheader. Breaking this hour, Nvidia earnings are just out. We have team coverage across real-time market reaction on the earnings call starting right now, with Bloomberg's Romaine, Bostick, and Ed Ludlow standing by. Also, economist Mark Zandi on AI's impact on the wider economy. And landmark settlement, Meta agreeing to pay billions to make sweeping changes as it settles a social media addiction lawsuit brought by a dozen states. Some question if the tech giant was let off too easy. We'll talk about that with the governor of Utah, Spencer Cox, the politics of data centers as well. From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Tyler Kendall. Kaylee has the night off.
And Joe, we begin tonight with breaking news. The top story in markets, Nvidia reporting another quarter of record earnings, but shares fluctuating as AI spending worries persist. Let's get to Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow in San Francisco and Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick joining us from world headquarters in New York on that and more. So, Ed, let's get to you first here. Another quarter of record earnings, but just how high is the bar for Nvidia at this point?
Incredibly high for lots of portions of both the buy side and the sell side, right? So the story is really simple. Nvidia had an astonishing quarter. Revenue basically doubled, adjusted earnings basically doubled, and it told us that in the current period, the fiscal third quarter, sales of $108 billion, plus or minus 2%, it puts them on like a massive trajectory. Their first quarter, potentially, of a company that has $100 billion in quarterly revenue. But for lots of people, the expectations were they could do even more than that, and they're in a very tough environment where they're having to explain further what the outlook is, not just this quarter, next quarter, but well into calendars 27 and 28, the bigger trends that they're seeing on how people spend money and plan to deploy their technology.
Yeah, Romaine, let's bring you in here on the stock reaction. It was negative at first, and it looks like things are turning pretty flat here. Nvidia has never been a real outperformer, with a few big exceptions when it comes to earnings night. What do we make of this reaction?
Yeah, I mean, of course, this had been the premier stock for the last few years. It's become a bit of a laggard over the last few weeks. In fact, we should point out, I mean, coming into this print, it was already down about 10% from its last all-time high, which was hit just a couple of days before its last earnings report. But ultimately, this comes down to one thing. I mean, we talk about sort of the curse of high expectations. And, you know, it's kind of weird to see a company basically that would double its earnings, double its revenue, and not see the stock get a huge pop. But that is kind of where we are. But ultimately, this comes down to how you value a stock like this. And it really comes down to two things. Investors, they're paying for earnings, they're paying for revenue, and more importantly, they're paying for growth in both of those. And when you're doubling at this rate, obviously the next step is probably a step down in that growth rate. And if you look at some of the analyst expectations over the next couple of years, that's exactly where we go. So what's the one thing, Joe, that everyone is now going to be focused on? It's less earnings growth, and less the profit, and less about the revenue growth, and more about how much it could protect its profit margins. Operating margins right now in the mid 70 percentage point range. That's expected to come down a tick or two. But if they can hold that or find a creative way to hold that in the 70s and above, I think maybe, just maybe, it's not a recommendation, you might see a little bit more of a tailwind for this stock.
Well, Ed, can we also talk more broadly about the... Oh, no. Ed, take it away.
Go ahead.
No, I just, Romaine couldn't be more spot on. You know, like, people forget that the environment is very difficult for Nvidia. When they're posting almost 100% revenue growth and still able to squeeze out bottom line growth that's also on an EPS basis, like 100%, it needs some explanation. So adjusted gross margins in the quarter gone, bang on 75%, what the street expected. The guide for this period is 74% plus or minus 50 basis points. What does that mean? What does it tell us about what Nvidia decided to do with higher memory costs, limited fab capacity, and that Bloomberg report in the background that the server makers are telling customers prices next year will be 15% higher? But they'll get asked that.
But also another thing, Ed, and this just gets me. I mean, just yesterday I was watching you. You held up this jalapeno chip, which is not an actual food product. It's an actual chip. But this is the other fear that a lot of investors have, is that Nvidia has more or less had a monopoly on this AI build out. When you talk about picks and shovels, it was the one picks and shovels player out there, and that's going to change in a big way. The AI has evolved. It's gone just from training to inference, a lot more focus on TPUs and CPUs. And I do wonder, Ed, when we talk about about just how much market share they are going to be able to command and pricing power they're going to be able to command if we start to see more entrants into this space, like Jalapeno, and not to mention all the hyperscalers, which are all building on some type of chip product or another.
Yeah, Nvidia had its first $10 billion quarter, or in excess of, in the second quarter of fiscal 24. And in this current period, the fiscal third, it will cross $100 billion of quarterly revenue. And in that period of history, it has all been training based. You're completely right. And so now that they've just hit 98% top line growth, there's a deceleration that happens. Next quarter, it will be 86% growth year on year, and then go down from there. And a part of that is Jensen Huang has been very dismissive to this point on the threat of custom silicon and other computing platforms. He's basically said they cannot do what Nvidia systems do, and they don't have the library of software to go with it. Now that will be tested, because the street is still modeling for decelerating growth by factoring in the increased use of other chips for the inference phase, that is running the AI models. And on paper, these chips are much more competitive on an economics dollar per token basis or throughput basis. So you're exactly right. And it wouldn't be a surprise if Jensen Huang gets asked, but this is Jensen Huang, and he will say, don't worry, guys, I got this. This is Nvidia. We're still the best.
Well, Ed, can we also follow up here and talk about maybe some of the competitive pressure related to the export control situation in China, something that we watch really closely here in Washington? What are we learning about how Nvidia has continued to navigate this and what it ultimately looks like going forward? Okay,
I appreciate that on balance of power, like the U.S. relationship with China is critically important. But for Nvidia, their base case assumption is zero, and it has been for some time. In this quarter gone, Generation Hopper, which is 2 generations removed of the current latest chips, was less than 1% of their data center sales. So for them, this is like a very distant potential upside. For Jensen Huang, the argument has been more emotional and more sort of strategic in a grander sense, where he says if American companies cannot sell their technology into China, there will be a vacuum. And the vacuum will be occupied by domestic players, which from a national security standpoint, but also just a holistic market standpoint, is not competitive. It is not good for American companies. But the reality is right now, it's not an important market for them. Well, and if you ask any sell side or buy side, they'll say, so what?
Yeah, it certainly is. But I do, just to your point, though, Tyler, too. I mean, we did catch up with Chris McGuire, who was one of the architects of kind of the big frameworks right now that led to a lot of these export controls written under the Biden administration that kind of blocked out those H100, A100, H200 chips, and now Blackwell. And, I asked him specifically about this idea as to whether this is sort of giving China a bit of a leg up in being able to sort of race ahead, develop its own stuff. But we also talked a lot about the loopholes. I mean, let's face it, we can't necessarily prove it, but anecdotally, everybody knows that there are countries that are able to get their hands on some of these advanced chips by using backdoor routes through Southeast Asia, through Japan, through the Netherlands, and other places. There's only so much government, Washington, I should say, can actually do to prevent this. So maybe they prevent it at scale, and that keeps Nvidia from being a big player. But Nvidia has been very vocal about this. They're against this. Much of Silicon Valley, much of the Bay Area is against this. And they're basically saying this is now a national security threat sort of in reverse by keeping these restrictions in place.
All right. Bloomberg's
I just left you speechless there,
Romaine.
Tyler. Wow. Yeah.
No, we appreciate both of you, and thank you for your expert analysis and insight. Ed Ludlow, Romaine Bostick, thank you both. And for more, we're going to bring in Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, to continue this conversation. Mark, let's just get your initial reaction here when it comes to Nvidia's earnings and what this is telling us about the AI investment cycle.
Well, it's a juggernaut, obviously. I mean, it shows that AI is powering all the macroeconomic growth. I mean, just to give you a number, GDP growth, the value of all the things that we produce, is growing about 2%. That's what we grew last year. That's what we grew so far this year. That's what we're tracking in the third quarter. And AI is accounting for at least a fourth of that. So without the boost from artificial intelligence, we can talk about the channels through which that's occurring. But that's without it, just to give context, we'd be growing closer to 1.5%. And we'd have a very kind of different narrative about how the economy is doing. So Nvidia is kind of is obviously the poster child for what's going on in AI. And AI is driving the economic train. It's critical to growth.
Well, it's an interesting moment that we're in here, Mark, with the AI data center build out being invoked in almost every conversation when it comes to inflation. And we saw the data this morning. I'm curious your thoughts on this because the whole market's going to be looking at Kevin Warsh on Friday when he gets to Jackson Hole. And I'm wondering to what extent he's going to have to factor in this trend.
Well, yeah, Joe, I mean, AI clearly is supporting growth and it is juicing up inflation. You can see it because of the demand for all the electronics that go into the data centers driving up chip prices, and that goes into everything. Obviously it's supporting growth, consumer spending, and supporting inflation that way as well. So it is adding to inflation. But, in the grand scheme of things, it's pretty small. I don't want to give you too many numbers. I'll give you another set of numbers. I mean, the core consumer expenditure deflator, kind of the measure that we all look at to gauge, where monetary policy should be, that's growing, 3.3, 3.4. We got some pretty good news today on that, the data we got today. AI is adding 0.3% to that. So it's meaningful, it's measurable, it's adding up, but in the grand scheme of things, it's not adding all that much. So I do think, broadly speaking, the new chair will get some latitude here because the inflation prints over the last couple of months, including today's numbers, were pretty good, indicating inflation is moving in the right direction. And I think they'll get some better numbers in the month ahead, which is key because that's going to determine what happens at the September meeting of the FOMC. So inflation's adding, AI is adding to inflationary pressures, but so far it's been relatively modest.
Okay. As we spend time with Mark Zandi, for those of you with us on Bloomberg Radio, we're seeing a nice move in Nvidia now as the call gets underway, up a little more than 4%, $9 above $218, which is a price we haven't seen in some time. Mark, is there a chance that Kevin Warsh makes no news on Friday?
Joe, that I'm sure is his goal. I mean, very different than, Chair Powell. Powell often used Jackson Hole as a way to say something that ultimately was market moving, a lot of very important speeches. But I suspect this one's going to be pretty quiet. That'd be my guess, given Kevin Warsh's perspective on communication strategy. I mean, he'll obviously reaffirm the 2% inflation target. He'll probably talk a bit about the better inflation numbers we've gotten over the last couple of months, and that provides some support to his position, his kind of dovish position on interest rates. He might talk a little bit about the communication strategy, the logic behind why he wants to pull back on, providing information to the marketplace. I mean, give it a little context there would be nice. And he did kind of tease out at the press conference at the last FOMC meeting. He might be talking about some broader trends around productivity growth. How big a deal is AI going to be to that? Demographic trends, maybe globalization. So at the end of the day, I don't expect it to be market moving.
Mm-hmm.
As we're watching, Nvidia shares now up 4.2%. We're getting this redhead across the Bloomberg terminal. The Nvidia CFO saying that revenue to grow 70% in fiscal year 2028. Let's just continue on this topic as it remains top of mind. Mark, what would be the signs that AI is actually transforming business output instead of just speeding up routine jobs? Can you just talk a little bit more about those indicators that you watch?
Yeah, I mean, so far, AI has been adding to the demand side of the economy, right? That's the growth. That's the investment spending, the CapEx, all the build out, what NVIDIA is feasting on, all of that growth. There's also the surge in AI stock prices. I mean, AI companies broadly defined, tech companies broadly defined, account for about 10% of GDP, but they account for about 50% of the S&P 500's market cap and about 2/3 of the increase in stock prices since ChatGPT was put on the planet 4 years ago. So it's driving a lot of growth on the demand side, not on the supply side, meaning productivity growth. That really hasn't shown up yet. So that's the key. We need to see that. Now, measuring productivity is tough, even in the best of times when things aren't moving around and there isn't these big technological changes. So maybe we're not the data is not up to actually capturing what's going on. But that's the key thing. We got to see productivity growth begin to pick up in a meaningful way. We're growing 2%. That's the GDP growth. That's current that's current productivity growth. If it starts inching higher to 2.25, 2.5, then I'd start to say, okay, now I'm starting to see it. By the way, those productivity gains are kind of critical to support these stock valuations, right? Because stock investors are betting on these companies really changing things fundamentally on the supply side of the economy, that we are going to get those productivity gains. If we don't see them, and we don't start to see them pretty soon, then one could imagine that investors are going to start, questioning their theories and valuations of these companies.
Well, it's great to have you back, as always, Mark. Mark Zandi of Moody's Analytics, we thank you so much. We're going to be checking back in with Ed Ludlow later in the hour with more from the Nvidia earnings call. It's still higher and higher yet, up 5% now. And this has been a very positive after-hours session for all the big names, really, that have been reporting. CrowdStrike is up 10% right now. Salesforce is up over 12% in extended trades. Coming up, the risk of a full-scale trade war between the U.S. and Canada as the Trump administration lines up new penalties and Ottawa refuses to back down. We'll bring you to the White House next for some exclusive reporting on balance of power, only on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Was throwing insults. He's not shy to throw insults to anyone. And I hit back, but I think it'd be more productive if we actually sit down and the Prime Minister and the President sit down and have a fair deal for everyone, because right now there's not certainty in either country. There's not stability.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tyler Kendall. I'm Joe Matthew. Spoke earlier with the Ontario Premier, Doug Ford. Talked with us yesterday, right around this time, in fact, making the case for cooler heads to prevail as the U.S. and Canada launch sweeping new tariffs against each other, threatening major economic consequences for consumers and businesses. Of course, as the midterms draw ever closer. However, the window for a compromise could be already closing. Bloomberg's Jeff Mason reporting exclusively the Trump administration is weighing further trade penalties against Canada in response to that country's retaliations. Has the spiral begun? Jeff joins us right now live from the North Lawn at the White House. This just the beginning, Jeff?
Has the spiral begun? Indeed, Jeff. I'm Jeff. You're Joe. Has it started? It certainly has in terms of last week with these talks breaking down and then the tariffs beginning. And as I'm sure I don't need to tell you, President Trump is not someone who backs down when he feels like the other side is retaliating. So the White House official telling me last night that there were talks about how to respond to the latest retaliation from Prime Minister Carney, and that would include additional raised tariffs and other trade penalties. No decision yet on that, so TBD. And of course, there's always a chance that the sides return to the negotiating table. They were close to a deal before everything fell apart late last Friday.
Well, Jeff, that's what I was going to ask. Do we know where these negotiations actually stand right now? Because officials will say that they never really lose contact with each other. But is there any back channeling happening here or any formal restart to these talks?
Well, it's Canada, right? It's not Iran. So you absolutely, they certainly have contact. And I like how you pointed that out, Tyler. I mean, yeah, they're back channeling and forward channeling for that matter. It's not that these folks don't talk at all, but there was a major breakdown. And part of that breakdown is because of the tension that's underlying this relationship over the fact that they're having this fight at all. And Canada has made clear, Prime Minister Carney has made clear that even if they had gotten a deal last Friday, that his goal is to make his country more independent from the U.S. economy. And that is a fundamental shift as well in the relationship between these two sides. But that's a long way of answering your question, Tyler, which is that I don't know that I haven't been told anyway that they have returned to the table in any way. I think they'll probably let us know when and if they do.
It's Canada, not Iran, might perfectly encapsulate the state of international affairs right now. Jeff Mason, these haven't kicked in yet. There's been a lot of bluster around here lately, to steal a term that the president used to describe Doug Ford. What are the odds they never take effect and all this bluster actually leads to a deal?
Good question. I'm not a betting man, certainly not on this issue or most issues or any issues, shall we say, related to the White House. But if past his prologue, it's certainly possible that they don't take effect at all. I mean, there's been bluster on both sides. I think we can certainly say that, and we've seen that. But both sides also do have an underlying interest in maintaining good relations. And I'm sure it shouldn't bear repeating, but it is true that Canada is the U.S. neighbor, friend, ally, longtime partner, and trading partner. That is just a big part of the identity of both countries. So it's hard to imagine them not finding their way back to the table, despite the pretty significant tensions in that relationship right now.
All right. Bloomberg's Jeff Mason reporting live from the White House tonight. Thank you so much. And we are going to turn now to the Middle East, because today Iran announced it's reaching a revenue-sharing deal with Oman to potentially collect fees from ships that transit the Strait of Hormuz. The IRGC saying in a statement, quote, the U.S. is obstructing the process without elaborating further. For more, we're joined now by Bloomberg's Becca Wasser. So, Becca, this would seem to be moving in the opposite direction that the U.S. would want. We've also heard from Iran that any final agreement with Oman isn't going to mean a full reopening of the Strait unless the U.S. does something like lift its naval blockade. Have we gotten any indications that the U.S. would even be willing to do that?
Right now, a lot is up in the air, and I think whether the blockade remains in place or could be something that could be ironed out in negotiations is definitely one of the big ones. But I think it's very notable that Iran has said one of the core tenets of this agreement with Oman, if they reach and finalize it, will be no military ships passing through that temporary corridor. And that, to me, implies Iran still very much has the blockade in its crosshairs for something that needs to be lifted.
What's happening in the Strait right now? We've been hearing, of course, the president talk about demining a lot lately. Yesterday, he declared it having been demined after making the same declaration last week. Is that news? There are questions about whether it is, in fact, fully demined. And are we still escorting ships through every night?
Well, I'm throwing a little bit of a card down on whether it's actually been fully mined.
Okay.
I think at this juncture in time, mines are very difficult to emplace. And there were a lot of mines that were put in either as singles or as clusters. And those move over time due to the currents of the waterways and how they were in place.
Okay.
So the U.S. being able to find every single mine and be able to remove them without, frankly, there being a lot of news about that already,
right.
That would be very much, not necessarily top of my list. So I think there are still likely mines. We've heard that from European allies, and that should quell some commercial shipping. And I think there are some announcements from these countries as well as international bodies trying to make sure that ships approach things with the appropriate amount of risk. Okay. So the Strait, still not open.
Wow.
In the final minute we have you, if we can build on other countries' responses. We're watching really closely how other countries respond to the U.S.'s threat for economic pressure, in particular China. I've heard that the administration isn't looking for them to completely cut off ties with Iran. But what could China do that maybe would be in their own interests, safeguarding their relationship with Iran, but also could give something to the U.S. ahead of Xi Jinping coming here?
I think it would just be reducing some of the existing flows that they have. China relies quite heavily on Iranian oil, and just reducing the amount that they have is probably the easiest way forward at this juncture in time.
Really interesting to think about where we are here with oil prices lower today. Brent down more than 1%. It doesn't sound like anything has changed beneath this market in terms of the fundamentals of what's happening in the Strait.
Absolutely not. And again, I think that's why we have to take a lot of these announcements with a grain of salt. We are hearing a lot of efforts to try and tell the markets to be a little bit more optimistic. We sometimes see that temporarily, but at the end of the day, nothing's changed. So there is no need for those market fundamentals to change.
That's why we have a geoeconomics team here, and you're a great part of it, Becca. Thank you. Bloomberg's Becca Wasser with us live in Washington. Coming up, Meta's billions of dollars landmark settlement getting a warm reception from officials across the aisle. Utah Governor Spencer Cox on what the ruling means for the future of social media next on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio alongside Tyler Kendall. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. As we turn back to the big news out of Silicon Valley tonight, Meta reaching a huge settlement worth up to roughly $18 billion, including fees, in a landmark case brought by states that accuse the company of designing Facebook and Instagram to intentionally hook young users. The agreement requires Meta to make major changes to how its platforms operate for children and teens. We spoke to Utah Governor Spencer Cox about the settlement a short time ago. We want to start, of course, with this Meta settlement, which is a big deal for our audience. It's a big deal for parents and families and a big deal for investors, Governor. Up to $18 billion is the headline. We had to note Meta pulled revenue of more than $60 billion in the last quarter. And there's been a thought in some quarters today that this is a rounding error, essentially, for a massive company. Did Meta get off easy?
Well, in some ways, yes, and in other ways, no. Look, I was one of the lone kind of dissenters when it came to the number. I thought the number should have been much higher. But what we got on the other end was something that we probably could not have gotten as much of in court, and that is the equitable relief. That is making sure that now they have to create these kids accounts, that they put parents back in charge, that we're changing the algorithm, that we're turning these platforms off at night, that we're having healthy pauses in there. These were all really important things that we've been pushing for. Utah was the first state to try to hold these companies accountable 3-4 years ago, and I'm really proud that we got that far.
So, Governor, would you say this is more about the message that this sends more so than the money? And if you could drill in a little bit more on the money, how does Utah plan to allocate this? I know you mentioned one example there, but what else are you looking for?
Yeah. So I want to say it's not the message as much as, I mean, we got actual changes to the platforms, and that piece is really important. That piece matters. This is going to protect kids going forward. By the way, your kids should not be on these platforms at all, so get them off. But if they are on, this is going to make them safer. We want to use the money to mitigate the harms that have been caused. Look, Meta knew. I mean, these guys, they knew what they were doing. They had their own research that showed that this was causing significant harm, increases in suicide ideation, increases in self-harm, anxiety and depression, especially with young women, and they buried that research and moved forward anyway. So we need to use this money to help, again, mitigate those harms, to help kids who are struggling. And it's not enough to just get off social media. It's what do we do next? We need to provide more opportunities for kids in the real world to get outside, to enjoy each other, to enjoy the real world again, and that's what we're going to use the money for.
Well, as a father of a 19-year-old, I'm breathing fresh air just hearing you say that, Governor. So tell us how this works. These new guardrails are important. How do you enforce restrictions, for instance, on how much time kids can scroll when they're more clever than we are about getting around some of these parameters, parental controls, using other devices or other logins? I'm sure you thought this through.
Yeah, look, there's no foolproof way to do this. We know that the kids are very smart, but this is huge because it requires the company for the first time to actually start age gating, right? So they have to know how old the person is. It puts parents in charge. The defaults now on these platforms are going to be to protect our kids. And now parents can override those if they want. If they want their kid on at 3 in the morning, the parent can change that and make it happen. I don't pretend that we're going to catch every single kid in this, but it raises the bar significantly. We're suing other platforms as well. In fact, there's a kicker in this deal that significantly raises the monetary settlement if other platforms join in. And so we're going after those platforms as well. And if we can get everybody moving this direction, it's just going to help lift everyone. It's going to help kids. It's going to help parents and make our country a better place.
So that's actually what I was going to ask next, Governor, because Meta is calling on those other platforms, their peers, including TikTok and YouTube, to conform with this settlement, saying that it's not really going to work unless everybody gets on board. So what happens next? And does this really have teeth if those other platforms don't abide as well?
Well, I mean, look, it certainly has teeth with Facebook and Instagram and the companies that are owned by Meta. Meta didn't settle this out of the goodness of their hearts. And this is what is frustrating. Like, they could have done this 3 years ago. They could have done this 10 years ago. They could have not killed our kids in the beginning. That would be great. But they did. And so here we are. What this does is the reason they were settling is because they were losing badly in these court cases. I mean, in New Mexico, they got rolled in a big way. I was actually excited for the case to move forward this fall in Utah. And they knew they were losing. There were 4 other cases that were just starting moving forward in Tennessee, California, other places. And they knew they were in trouble. They had the whistleblowers. The harms are so clear. And these other companies are feeling that too. They know that the court cases weren't going well. They don't want to get on the stand and have to testify about how much harm they've done to kids. So I hope that this will be a driver to get everyone to the table. We passed bills requiring this kind of stuff years ago. They sued us to prevent that from happening. We're still litigating those. The companies don't want this bad PR, and hopefully, you know, that this will be a positive for Meta as people see that they can actually do something and that they actually care about kids instead of pretending to care about kids.
Well, and they missed a lot of bad PR potentially in not having Mark Zuckerberg testify in this case based on this settlement. Governor, I'd like to ask you about the issue of data center because it ties into everything that we're talking about here eventually. And while you were out ahead when it comes to clamping down on sites like Facebook and Instagram, you were also ahead in the race to house data centers in your state. We talked about some of the projects last time you were with us, and you've brought forth a number of ideas about alternative energy to power them. Now that this has become such a visceral campaign issue, are you surprised to see this splitting both ways with Democrats and Republicans looking to control data centers? And are you looking for new rules of the road in Utah?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, this has been fascinating. I mean, it's been a long time since we've seen kind of a backlash to something this big. I do think it goes back to social media in some ways. Look, data centers, there's a lot of misinformation about data centers. I'm pretty neutral on data centers, not a huge fan, but they are important. They're important to our modern world in very big ways. Yeah. But I do think that they are the physical embodiment of people's concerns about big technology and AI. And look, I hope one of the lessons that those AI companies out there are learning today is that they should think of kids on the front end. It shouldn't take us 10 years, 15 years to understand the harms and actually hold companies accountable, and that they'll make good decisions up front right now. When it comes to new rules for data center, yes. I mean, like everywhere else, I issued an executive order several months ago to put new restrictions around data centers. Utah has actually been really out in front of this. I know the nuance is kind of lost, but we passed some bills last session around water use and disclosing water use. Companies are using the best technology now, closed loop systems, all of those things. You have to bring your own power in Utah. We were the first state to do that, so we're not raising rates for consumers. But we are working on a new bill to try to put some more parameters around that.
Interesting. You know, we talked to Senator Ted Cruz yesterday, just quickly, realizing that he's coming at this from a different state and a different body of government. He says hyperscalers ought to just start paying electric bills. Guess what? We want to put a data center in your community, and you'll never have to pay an electric utility bill again. Is that the kind of thing that might work?
Yeah, look, I've been very critical of the hyperscalers for not getting out in front of this. I mean, you know, these are some of the wealthiest companies in the history of the world with trillion-dollar market caps who are trying to nickel and dime communities. That should not be happening. They absolutely should come in and let people know the benefits that can come from this. You know, build new schools, lower people's taxes, lower people's electricity bills, and don't destroy the environment. All of those things are very possible, but they have to bear that responsibility. It's not up to the politicians to do that. You know, I'm not here to defend them. People are right to be upset. People are angry, and I totally get that. And so I think Senator Cruz is right, and communities should get to decide. There are going to be real winners and losers in this data center battle, and some communities who are interested in data centers coming, and the data centers, the hyperscalers are willing to participate and give back to the community, they're going to really benefit from this.
But in some ways also, we have seen some of these hyperscalers work with governments, such as in Texas, for example. We saw a lot of the major players like Meta sign on to the Governor Abbott, his guardrails that he's ruled out there. Can you just give us any insight into what it looks like to work with these companies moving forward, and if you have plans to engage with them, particularly when it does come to this issue and the argument you're making that they have to bear the brunt of this?
Yeah. Well, again, Texas put a moratorium. The governor of Texas put a moratorium on any data center building, and so again, a red state. You've seen blue states doing the same thing, and we just haven't seen that type of a response to a technology in some time. And look, those are similar conversations. I've been very blunt with everybody I've been able to talk to in this space to tell them, like, hey guys, like you're just not going to be able to build anywhere unless you stop being a little less selfish and actually go out and help people understand that there is a benefit. And if there's not a benefit, then it's just not going to happen.
That was Utah Governor Spencer Cox speaking with us earlier today. And turning now to the key inflation data out earlier, the data for July coming in line with expectations, potentially taking some pressure off the Federal Reserve ahead of its annual symposium in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, as investors eagerly await remarks from Fed Chair Kevin Warsh for his first address at the summit. Joining us now from Jackson Hole is Bloomberg's Michael McKee for a preview. So, Mike, let's start with PCE because it seemed like both hawkish and dovish members on the FOMC could pull different things from the data that we got. So what did you see in terms of what this could mean for the future path of monetary policy?
I don't think it changes much, Tyler, because of what you said. Both sides have something to look at here. The inflation rates did not go down on a year-over-year basis, 3.3% for the PCE core, 3.7% for the PCE headline. And basically, we're back to where we were before the Iran war started. And that wasn't good enough at that point for the hawks. So they can still argue that you need to do more to bring inflation down. On the other hand, we saw a little bit weaker consumer spending this past month. And so perhaps the people who are saying we should stand pat are going to argue, well, if the economy is weakening, let's wait and see what we get with the jobs report and the other data we get before the September 16th meeting and not rush into any kind of rate cuts.
You look like John Wayne sitting out there, Michael McKee. Give us a sense of the prelude, the conversations that are happening there now, yesterday and the day before. Everyone's looking ahead to Friday. But what is the spirit at Jackson Hole this year ahead of this speech?
Well, you've always got good spirit here because, just look behind me. It makes everybody in a good mood. I think that there are two issues hanging over the conference this year. One is, will he or won't he? Will Kevin Warsh give us more about how he looks at inflation and how he plans to bring it down to 2%? That's been a lot of the conversation here is, do you think he's going to do it or do you think he's not? And then the other is, whatever happens with Lisa Cook, since she's supposed to file her final reply to the president. If he comes back today, tomorrow, Friday, and fires her again, then obviously that's going to be a major topic of conversation.
No doubt.
Wow, a lot to watch. Bloomberg's Michael McKee reporting live for us from Jackson Hole. Thank you, as always. And coming up, a look at the president's endorsement power. We'll bring you the results from last night's South Carolina Republican runoff, plus more on the day's big headlines when our political panel assembles. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio.
It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and Radio. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Tyler Kendall, who's in for Kaylee today. Nvidia's investor call is happening as we speak. The blockbuster earning report leading to some major swings in the shares. Now, though, moving decidedly higher after we heard from the maestro. Jensen Huang, and Nvidia's CFO, I should say, saying revenue will jump 70% in the next fiscal year. Jensen Huang's words will be important here as well. And Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow has been listening. He's got an ear on the call, and we're lucky to have you break away for just a minute here. Ed, is the story changing this hour?
The story's changed. It changed in a moment. Nvidia does not typically give annual guidance. This is rare. And so the CFO said that there will be 70% revenue growth in fiscal 28. That's calendar year 27. The street going into this had consensus of 45% growth. And what Jensen Huang, the CEO, went on to say is that is revenue growth representative of a supply-constrained environment. He explained that right now, a lot of their businesses are growing at 100%, but the 70% figure reflects their ability to supply. It is revenue growth that factors in what they can get their hands on in the supply chain to serve customers. And so it was fighting talk, right? It was a superlative in many ways, but Nvidia doesn't typically do this. It was very notable.
Can we drill into this headline? Nvidia CFO saying Vera Rubin to be the fastest growing generation, and what we're learning about the adoption timeline for that generation of product. What were you watching, and what did we learn?
Yeah, we learned a lot. So Vera Rubin is the latest generation of accelerated computing platform. In that server design, Nvidia is accountable for much more of it, a greater proportion than even prior generations. So for everyone that ships, Nvidia gets more dollars. It's in full production, but the July quarter represented 0 sales of the platform. In this current period, the fiscal third quarter, Vera Rubin will be about 20% of data center sales. And what they're saying is that although when you ramp a new technology and you start delivering it to customers, there is some margin impact and it takes time, this is a very quick transition from one generation of tech, Blackwell, to the next. And again, the conviction that they're outlining is very high. It's in part what's driving this top line growth narrative for the coming calendar year or so. But to be sure, Nvidia's got problems just like everyone has, which is the supply chain right now is very hard.
All right, Bloomberg's Ed Ludlow will be watching all of this. We'll be watching to you for more developments. Thank you so much. We do want to return now to some domestic political stories and turn to South Carolina, where Senator Darlene Graham won South Carolina's Republican Senate primary runoff election, taking one step closer to winning the seat held by her late brother. Graham defeated Congressman Ralph Norman with 52% of votes counted, overcoming a late stumble in last week's debate. Graham thanked President Trump for throwing his support behind her campaign.
I want to thank President Trump for all of his support and his endorsement. Mr. President, Lindsay truly loved you and viewed you as one of his closest friends. I appreciate that bond and appreciate all that you've done for our country. Our victory would not have been possible without you, and we are truly grateful. South Carolina is truly Trump country.
Joining us now is our political panel tonight, Democratic strategist Caitlin Legacki, senior fellow at Third Way, alongside Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, president and CEO of Republican Main Street Partnership. So, Sarah, let's get your thoughts on this first. You heard Darlene Graham there say this is Trump country. This is considered to be a relatively reliable Republican stronghold. So was this really all about President Trump's endorsement? That's what made the difference here.
It absolutely was. Without him, I don't think she would have won. Now, I would say that the congressman had been defeated in other areas. He was probably not the best candidate, but she wouldn't have won without President Trump, and the turnout will show that. So here she is, and she'll learn. The polling that we did after she made that error, people were like, we appreciate it. She told the truth. Yes. Yeah. You don't see too many politicians that actually tell the truth and admit, I don't know the answer to that. I am sure today she does know the answer, but they found that refreshing, so I was not surprised to see her have
I have long said the three words, I don't know, are the three most attractive words. But when you're running for higher office and you say that you don't know about geopolitics, that can be a tough one, obviously. But if you're a Democrat named Annie Andrews in South Carolina, and you're being framed as a pediatrician and a gun safety advocate, how do you get out of the blocks?
I don't think she does.
Okay.
I think that of all of the states on the map this cycle, South Carolina is at the very bottom of the list. It's just it's such a reliably red state. It is entirely possible that the landscape shifts so much that South Carolina comes on the map. But I think the amount of work that would have to be done there in order to get her across the finish line is just really hard.
The other primary that we were watching last night was in Oklahoma. And not to get too into the weeds here, but we know that President Trump opposed the candidate that did not win in part over allegations that he help stop an aluminum smeltering plant that was going to take hold in Oklahoma. And I'm going to bring this up to make a bridge here because Bloomberg News did an analysis about some of the recent Canadian tariffs that they're set to hit the hardest in places like Michigan and Ohio, where we have two really closely watched Senate races that could determine the balance of power in Congress. How are Republicans navigating the latest wave of this tariff turmoil that's come up in the last week with our Canadian partners?
They are trying to figure out a strategy because also Maine. So Canada's watching very closely in our November elections. And it's obviously they don't care for President Trump. So if they can cost him 3 Senate seats, it could be the difference in this election. And it could go to a Democratic Senate. So Canada's interesting. They're in for this fight, and they're not backing down to President
Is Main Street hoping that everyone climbs down in the next couple of days? They haven't been implemented yet.
In those districts are Main Street members. Now, Michigan, we're hoping to pick up. He's a Main Street. But Susan Collins, certainly in Maine, and John in Ohio are both members of Main Street. So we're hoping that somehow they can figure out a way to get around this.
We've been talking a lot about Nvidia this evening. You're joining us both on a big evening here at Bloomberg with Nvidia earnings. This is huge for the markets here, and it brings up a conversation about AI data centers. If you've been watching, we can't get through a conversation without it coming up. I'm guessing that's been the case for you guys as well. Republican and Democrat. Are you both together on this? Is this going to make or break campaigns in November?
I don't know if it'll make or break campaigns in November just because so many of them saw this coming and have been staking out pretty nuanced positions or positions that were opposed to data centers early on. But, you know, I was talking to someone yesterday and they said they have seen polling where data centers are polling worse than the war in Iran.
That is true. We have polling that shows that. And it's misinformation, and that's really the reason why.
Well, I'm hearing more about that. I mean, in many cases, people have never seen a data center in their life. So where are they
No,
going?
they have no idea. And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but what's going on with the data centers is some of the older ones used a lot of water, used a lot of electricity. Absolutely. We're not going to deny that. But the newer ones, they recycle the water, the electricity. They actually have grids that they're donating back to the community. And that message is not getting out. There is a lot of research that shows a foreign country that will go unnamed is actually filling our social networks with misinformation because they want to defeat the United States. They want to be faster in getting these data centers. The future's AI, and if I get tired of politics, I happen to own the stock that we're talking about. Maybe I can retire someday.
Wow, all right, pro Nvidia.
There you go.
Can we say China out loud?
There you go. See, we're retired together.
Are we not saying China out loud anymore? That's what we're talking about.
Okay, China is the one.
Okay.
I mean, I don't have the proof that shows it's China, but that is the talk that China, because China's building their own data centers. And AI is the future, whether American people want to recognize that or not. However, I think you're going to see Congress put some guardrails around data centers.
Is that what it's going to take in order for Americans to get on board? Congress has to act, or are they going to have checks in their pockets, as we heard Senator Cruz suggest?
I think Congress is going to have to act, led by a gentleman by the name of Obernolte from California. He actually has
Lori Trahan's working with on that,
but at the same time, the companies have to get out there and start explaining what they're doing.
Is this bipartisan, Caitlin?
Yes, it is.
We have a bipartisan issue.
And I think Governor Cox was correct that this isn't about the data centers themselves. It is about what the lack of control people feel related to technology right now. And so the companies have to come out and make people feel better about it so that they're not so afraid.
Caitlin Legacki, Sarah Chamberlain. We could talk about this all night. Data center. Tyler, thank you. We'll meet you back here tomorrow on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.